The frozen air bit into Grace Garrison's skin like 1,000 tiny knives as she stumbled through the endless white, her horse long gone and her hope fading with each labored breath. It was December 1882, and Grace had been traveling from Denver to meet her brother in Moab, Utah, a journey that should have taken careful planning, but had instead become a desperate race against time when news reached her that he had fallen gravely ill. She had left Colorado in haste, hiring a guide who promised he knew the mountain passes well enough to make the journey even with winter closing in. That guide had abandoned her 2 days ago when the storm began to build, taking most of their supplies and disappearing into the gray dawn before she had awakened. Her horse had spooked and run off just hours ago when lightning split the sky, leaving her with only a small pack containing a blanket, some dried beef, and a canteen that was now frozen solid. The blizzard had swept in with a fury that seemed almost personal, as though the mountains themselves had decided she had no business crossing them. Grace pulled her wool coat tighter, but the wind found every gap, every opening, turning her body into a vessel of ice. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, maybe 2. Time had lost all meaning in the white void. She could barely see 3 feet ahead of her, and for all she knew, she was walking in circles. At 23 years old, Grace had always prided herself on her independence. She had worked as a schoolteacher in Denver for 3 years, saving every penny, determined to prove that a woman could make her own way in the world without relying on a husband or father. Her parents had died of typhoid when she was 17, leaving her and her older brother Thomas to fend for themselves. Thomas had gone west to Utah to work in the silver mines, while Grace had stayed in Denver to finish her education. Now, stumbling through this frozen hell, her independence felt less like a virtue and more like foolish pride. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she fell forward into the snow. The cold embraced her like a lover, and for a moment she considered simply staying there. It would be easy. The cold was making her tired, so very tired. She had read once that freezing to death was not painful, that eventually you simply fell asleep. That did not sound so terrible. No. Grace forced her eyes open. Thomas needed her. Her baby brother, who used to catch frogs by the creek behind their childhood home, who had cried at their parents' funeral, but had tried to hide it because he thought he needed to be strong for her. She could not give up. Not yet. She pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. The wind screamed in her ears and snow pelted her face. She took one step forward, then another. Her body moved on instinct, on sheer stubbornness. The world was nothing but white and cold and the burning in her lungs. Then she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the storm. A horse's whinny, distant but real. "Help," she tried to call out, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. She tried again, louder this time. "Help me." The shape that emerged from the snow was like something from a dream. A man on horseback, his hat pulled low, a scarf wrapped around his face. He seemed impossibly large, impossibly solid, a fixed point in a world that had become nothing but chaos. Grace tried to call out again, but her legs finally gave up their fight. She fell forward, and this time she did not have the strength to rise. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," a deep voice said, rough but steady. "I've got you." Grace's world went dark. When she woke, the first thing she noticed was warmth. Blessed, beautiful warmth. She was lying on something soft, wrapped in heavy blankets. A fire crackled nearby, its orange glow pushing back against the darkness. For a moment, she simply existed in that space between sleep and waking, where nothing hurt and everything was safe. Then memory crashed back, and she sat up abruptly. Pain shot through her limbs, and she gasped. "Easy there," that same rough voice said. "You are safe. You are all right." Grace turned her head to see the man from the snow. He had removed his scarf and hat, revealing a face that was weathered and angular with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were a startling gray, like storm clouds, and they watched her with a mixture of concern and wariness. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30, with dark hair that was slightly too long and curled at his collar. "Where am I?" Grace asked, her voice coming out as a croak. "Old mining shelter about 5 miles north of where I found you," he said. "It is not much, but it keeps the wind out. Name is Gideon Irving. I have a ranch about 15 miles east of here. Was out looking for some strays when the storm hit." "Grace Garrison," she managed. "I was traveling to Moab. My guide left me and my horse ran off." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Your guide left you? In this weather?" "2 days ago, when the storm was just starting. I think he realized it was going to be bad and decided I would slow him down." "I hope I never meet that man," Gideon said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made Grace believe he meant it. "Because I would have some words for him." Grace looked around the shelter. It was barely more than a shack, with walls made of rough timber and a roof that she suspected leaked in better weather. But right now, with the fire burning and the wind howling outside, it felt like a palace. "How long was I out there?" she asked. "I do not know," Gideon said. "How long since your horse ran off?" Grace tried to think. "Hours. It was morning when it happened. The lightning spooked her." Gideon nodded. "It is night now. You are lucky you stayed on your feet as long as you did. Another hour and I would not have found you in time." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She had come that close to dying out there in the snow. If Gideon had not been searching for his strays, if he had decided the storm was too dangerous and turned back earlier, she would be frozen somewhere in the drifts, and no one would find her until spring. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke. "Thank you for saving my life." Gideon looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, like he did not know what to do with it. "Anyone would have done the same," he said. "But you are the one who did it," Grace insisted. "You are the one who rode out in that storm and found me." He did not respond to that, just moved to the fire and picked up a small pot that was sitting near the flames. "Got some broth here. You need to get something warm inside you." Grace accepted the cup he offered, wrapping her hands around it and letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. The broth was simple, just salted water with some bits of dried meat, but it tasted like the finest meal she had ever eaten. She sipped it slowly, feeling warmth spread through her chest and stomach. "How bad is the storm?" she asked. "Bad enough that we are not going anywhere for a while," Gideon said. "Could last a day, could last 3. Hard to say with these mountain storms." "But my brother," Grace said, alarm rising in her chest. "He is sick in Moab. I have to get to him." "You will not be any good to your brother if you die trying to reach him in a blizzard," Gideon said firmly. "We wait out the storm. Then I will help you get to Moab." Grace wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She had nearly died once already. Trying to push on would be suicide. "You do not have to help me further," she said. "You have already done so much. Once the storm clears, I can make my own way." Gideon gave her a look that she could not quite read. "Miss Garrison, you do not have a horse, you do not have proper supplies, and you clearly do not know these mountains. I am not letting you go out there alone." "You do not even know me," Grace said. "Why would you do this?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Gideon said simply. "And because if I let something happen to you after saving you once, I would never forgive myself." There was something in the way he said it, in the directness of his gray eyes, that made Grace's breath catch. She looked away, focusing on her broth. "Thank you," she said again, quieter this time. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Grace studied Gideon when she thought he was not looking. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who was comfortable in his own skin, who knew his place in the world. There was a quietness to him, a stillness that was calming after the chaos of the blizzard. "How far is Moab from here?" Grace asked eventually. "About 40 miles as the crow flies," Gideon said. "Closer to 60 on the trails. In good weather it would take about 3 days on horseback. With the snow, maybe 4 or 5. Grace felt her heart sink. That long, Thomas might not have that long. But what choice did she have? "Tell me about your brother," Gideon said, perhaps sensing her distress. Grace was grateful for the distraction. "His name is Thomas. He is 2 years older than me. We grew up in Missouri, but our parents died 6 years ago. He went to work in the silver mines in Utah, and I stayed in Denver to teach." "That is hard work, mining," Gideon said. "He wanted to make something of himself," Grace said. "Wanted to save enough to buy his own land someday, start a ranch maybe. He always loved horses. How did he get sick?" "I do not know the details. I got a telegram from one of his friends saying he had taken a fever and it was not getting better. That was 8 days ago. I left Denver as soon as I could." Gideon nodded. "Fevers can be dangerous, but they can also break. Do not give up hope yet." "I am trying not to," Grace said, "but being stuck here while he is suffering." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I understand," Gideon said. "I lost my father 2 years ago. He was working on repairing the barn roof, fell and hit his head. I was out on the range when it happened. By the time I got back, he was already gone. I kept thinking that if I had just been there, maybe I could have done something." "I am sorry," Grace said softly. "The point is," Gideon continued, "I understand wanting to be there for family, but you cannot control everything. Sometimes all you can do is your best and hope that is enough." Grace nodded, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away. She had cried enough in the past few days. Now she needed to be strong. "You should rest," Gideon said. "You have been through a lot. I will keep the fire going." "What about you?" Grace asked. "You need to sleep too." "I will rest later," Gideon said. "Right now, making sure you are all right is more important." Grace wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. She lay back down, pulling the blankets up to her chin. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Gideon silhouetted against the firelight, solid and watchful, a guardian against the storm. When Grace woke again, pale light was filtering through the gaps in the walls. The storm still raged outside, but it seemed less violent than before. Gideon was asleep near the fire, his head pillowed on his saddle, his coat spread over him like a blanket. He looked younger in sleep. The hard lines of his face softened. Grace sat up carefully, trying not to wake him. Her body ached in a dozen places and her head felt fuzzy, but she was alive. That was something. She looked around the shelter with fresh eyes. It was even more primitive than she had realized last night. The walls had gaps wide enough to stick a finger through, and there was a bucket in the corner that she suspected was meant for answering nature's call. A few supplies were stacked near the door, some rope, a tin of matches, a bag that probably held food. Gideon's rifle leaned against the wall within easy reach. Grace stood slowly, testing her legs. They held, though they trembled. She moved to the door and cracked it open, just enough to peer outside. The world was white. Snow covered everything, falling in thick sheets that made it impossible to see more than a few feet. The wind howled like a living thing, and drifts were piling up against the side of the shelter. Grace shivered and quickly shut the door. "It is still bad out there," Gideon's voice said behind her, rough with sleep. Grace turned to find him sitting up, running a hand through his hair. "I can see that. Do you really think it will let up soon?" "These storms usually blow themselves out in a day or two," Gideon said, "but there is no telling for sure. We have enough supplies to wait it out either way." "I am sorry," Grace said. "You would be home by now if not for me." Gideon shook his head. I would be stuck in this storm either way. At least this way I have company. Grace smiled despite herself. Not much company, I am afraid. I am not at my best. You survived a blizzard and nearly freezing to death, Gideon said. I would say you are doing just fine. He stood and moved to the fire, adding more wood from the small pile in the corner. Are you hungry? Grace realized she was starving. Very. Gideon pulled out some supplies from his pack and started preparing a simple meal of hardtack, dried meat, and coffee. It was not fancy, but Grace ate it like it was a feast. As they ate, they talked. Grace told Gideon about her life in Denver, about teaching children their letters and numbers, about the satisfaction of seeing a student's face light up when they finally understood something. Gideon told her about his ranch, about the work of raising cattle and horses, about the satisfaction of watching a foal take its first steps. It sounds like you love it, Grace said. I do, Gideon said. It is hard work, and there are times when I question why I do it. But when I am out on the range with nothing but the sky above me and the land stretching out in all directions, I cannot imagine doing anything else. You live alone? Grace asked, then felt her face heat. I am sorry, that was too personal. It is all right, Gideon said. Yes, I live alone. My father left the ranch to me when he died. I have a couple of ranch hands who help during the busy seasons, but mostly it is just me. That sounds lonely, Grace said. Gideon shrugged. Sometimes, but I like the quiet, and I have my dog, Buck. He is probably tearing the house apart wondering where I am. Grace smiled at the thought. What kind of dog? Some kind of mix. I found him half-starved on the road about a year ago. He is the ugliest dog you have ever seen, but he is loyal. They spent the day talking, sharing stories, and keeping the fire fed. Grace learned that Gideon had lived his whole life in this area, that he knew these mountains like some people knew the lines of their own hands. She learned that he had never been further east than Denver, never seen an ocean, never wanted to. I like knowing where I am, he said. I like knowing the land. The idea of going somewhere where everything is different, where I do not know the rhythms of the place, it does not appeal to me. I think I understand that, Grace said. Denver was hard at first because it was so different from Missouri, but after a while it became home. I knew which shops had the best prices, which streets to avoid after dark, where to find the first spring flowers. Exactly, Gideon said, and he smiled at her. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face, making him almost handsome. Grace felt something flutter in her chest and quickly looked away. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. Grace and Gideon fell into an easy rhythm, taking turns keeping the fire going, sharing the limited space without awkwardness. Grace was surprised by how comfortable she felt with him. She had always been somewhat reserved around men, careful to maintain proper distance. But trapped in the small shelter with Gideon, those social niceties fell away. He treated her with respect, but without the excessive formality that so many men used around women. He did not talk down to her or act as though she could not understand things. He was just himself, and that made it easy for her to be herself. On the third morning, Grace woke to silence. No howling wind, no pelting snow, just quiet. She sat up to find Gideon already awake, looking at the door. It stopped, he said. They opened the door together and stepped out into a transformed world. The snow was deep, coming up to Grace's knees, and everything was covered in a thick white blanket. But the sky was clear and blue, and the sun was shining, making the snow sparkle like diamonds. It is beautiful, Grace breathed. It is, Gideon agreed, but we need to get moving. I will need to dig out the shelter door to get my horse, and then we need to get you to Moab. Your horse was here the whole time? Grace asked, surprised. There is a small lean-to around back, Gideon explained. Not much, but it kept him out of the worst of the wind. It took them the better part of the morning to get ready. Gideon's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Copper, was restless but unharmed. Gideon fashioned a simple travois to carry their supplies, and then he helped Grace onto the saddle. "You will ride, I will walk," he said when she started to protest. "We can switch off later, but for now I want to make sure you stay warm." The journey was slow. The snow was deep, and Copper struggled to break through the drifts. Gideon led the horse carefully, testing the ground ahead, making sure they did not step into any hidden ravines or holes. Grace held onto the saddle horn and tried not to think about how close Gideon was, or how her heart had skipped when he had lifted her onto the horse, his hands strong and sure on her waist. They made camp that night in a small grove of trees that provided some shelter. Gideon built a fire and prepared another simple meal. Grace's body ached from the riding, but it was a good ache, the ache of movement and life. "We should reach Moab by tomorrow evening if the weather holds," Gideon said as they ate. "Thank you," Grace said. "I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. I would not have made it without you." "You are stronger than you think," Gideon said. "You walked for hours in that blizzard. Most people would have given up long before that." "I kept thinking about Thomas," Grace said. "About how I had to keep going for him." "That is love," Gideon said quietly. "Love makes us stronger than we have any right to be." Grace looked at him across the fire. In the flickering light, his face was all plains and shadows. "Have you ever been in love?" she asked. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I was once," he said finally. "There was a girl in town when I was younger, Sarah. She was beautiful and charming, and I was convinced she was the one, but she wanted to move to a city, wanted a life bigger than what I could offer. She married a banker and moved to San Francisco." "I am sorry," Grace said. Gideon shrugged. "It was a long time ago, and looking back, I think I was more in love with the idea of her than with who she actually was. We wanted different things. It never would have worked." "Do you think you will ever marry?" Grace asked. "I hope so," Gideon said. "The ranch feels empty sometimes. I would like to have a family, children, but I am not going to marry just to have someone there. I want what my parents had. They were partners, you know. They worked together, laughed together, supported each other. That is what I want." Grace felt her throat tighten. Her own parents had been like that too. She remembered them working side by side in their small garden, remembered their quiet conversations in the evening, the way they had looked at each other. She wanted that too, more than she had realized. "I am sure you will find it," she said softly. "What about you?" Gideon asked. "Any men waiting for you back in Denver?" Grace laughed. "No. There were a few men who called on me, but none of them felt right. Most of them wanted a wife who would stay home and keep house. They were not interested in my teaching, and some of them actively disapproved of it. I could not imagine spending my life with someone who did not respect what I do." "Any man who does not respect a woman's work is a fool," Gideon said firmly. Grace felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thank you for saying that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Gideon suggested they get some rest. They would need an early start in the morning. Grace lay wrapped in her blankets, looking up at the stars through the bare branches. She could hear Gideon's breathing evening out as he fell asleep, and she felt safe in a way she had not felt in days. Maybe ever. She was falling for him. The realization came to her clearly, undeniably. This quiet, steady man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. This man who spoke of love and partnership with such sincerity. This man who made her feel seen and valued in a way no one else ever had. But what did it matter? They were from different worlds. Once they reached Moab, he would return to his ranch, and she would stay with Thomas. She might never see him again, The thought made her chest ache. The next day dawned clear and cold. They broke camp early and continued their journey. The snow was still deep, but Copper was sure-footed and Gideon knew the trails. They made good time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow, they crested a hill and saw Moab spread out below them. It was not a large town, just a collection of buildings along a wide street, but to Grace, it looked like salvation. "Thank you," she said to Gideon, her voice thick. "Thank you for getting me here safely." "Of course," Gideon said. "Now let's find your brother." They rode into town as the last light was fading from the sky. Grace asked the first person they saw where she could find Thomas Garrison, and they were directed to a small house at the end of the main street. Grace practically fell off the horse in her hurry to reach the door. She knocked loudly, her heart pounding. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Can I help you?" "I am looking for Thomas Garrison," Grace said. "I am his sister." The woman's face broke into a smile. "Oh, thank goodness. He has been asking for you. Come in, come in." Grace stepped inside, Gideon following behind her. The house was small but clean, warmed by a stove in the corner, and there, lying on a bed near the stove, was Thomas. He looked thin and pale, but his eyes were clear and they widened when he saw Grace. "Gracie," he said weakly, "you made it." Grace rushed to his side and took his hand. It was warm, not fevered. "I made it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I am here, Tommy, I am here." "I knew you would come," Thomas said, squeezing her hand. "I knew you would not let me down." The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson. She had been caring for Thomas since he fell ill. "The fever broke 2 days ago," she explained. "He is on the mend now, but he is still very weak." Grace looked at her brother, really looked at him. His color was better than she had expected, and while he was thin, he did not look like he was at death's door. "You are going to be all right," she said, half question, half statement. "I am going to be fine," Thomas said, "especially now that you are here." He looked past Grace to Gideon, who was standing awkwardly near the door. "Who is your friend?" "This is Gideon Irving," Grace said. "He saved my life in the blizzard. Without him, I would not have made it." Thomas's expression grew serious. "Then I owe you everything," he said to Gideon. "Thank you for bringing my sister back to me." Gideon looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Thomas said. "Most people would not have gone out in that storm. You are a good man, Mrs. Patterson insisted on feeding them both, and Grace realized she was starving. They sat at the small table while Mrs. Patterson served up a simple stew, and Grace ate gratefully. Gideon was quiet during the meal, and Grace found herself watching him. Now that they were here, now that Thomas was safe, what happened next? Gideon would return to his ranch and she would stay here with her brother until he was strong enough to travel. And then what? Would she go back to Denver? Would she ever see Gideon again? The thought of never seeing him again made her chest ache. After they ate, Mrs. Patterson showed Grace to a small spare room where she could sleep. Gideon said he would find a room at the boarding house in town. "Wait," Grace said, following him to the door. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Gideon looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Do you want to?" "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "Yes, I do." "Then I will come by in the morning," Gideon said. "I want to make sure you are settled before I head back to the ranch." Grace wanted to say more, wanted to ask him to stay, but she could not find the words. So she just nodded and watched as he disappeared into the night. She went back inside to find Thomas watching her with a knowing smile. "He is a good man," he said. "Yes, he is," Grace agreed. "And I think you have feelings for him," Thomas said. Grace felt her face heat. "I do not know what you mean." "Gracie, I am your brother, I know you, and I saw the way you looked at him." Grace sat down on the edge of Thomas's bed. "It does not matter," she said quietly. "He is going back to his ranch and I need to stay here with you." "I am going to be fine," Thomas said. "Mrs. Patterson is taking excellent care of me. You do not need to stay on my account." "But I came all this way," Grace protested. "And I am grateful," Thomas said. "But I do not want you to give up something good because of me. If you have feelings for this man, you should tell him." "I barely know him," Grace said. "Sometimes you do not need much time to know," Thomas said. "When you know, you know." Grace lay awake that night in the small spare room, thinking about Gideon, about the strength in his hands when he pulled her from the snow, the steady calm in his voice when he said he had her, about the way he looked at her across the fire, like she was someone worth looking at, about how safe she felt with him, how seen. Was Thomas right? Was she falling in love with him? Yes, she realized, she was. But what could she do about it? She could not just throw herself at him. She had her pride, and besides, what if he did not feel the same way? What if she was just another person he had helped? Nothing more. When morning came, Grace was no closer to answers. She helped Mrs. Patterson with breakfast and checked on Thomas, who was looking stronger already. True to his word, Gideon appeared mid-morning looking freshly washed and slightly less weathered. "How is your brother?" he asked. "Better," Grace said. "Much better. Mrs. Patterson says he should be back on his feet in a week or so." "That is good news," Gideon said. "I am glad I was able to get you here in time." There was an awkward pause. Grace did not know what to say, how to ask him to stay, how to tell him what she was feeling. "I should probably head back to the ranch," Gideon said finally. "I have been gone longer than I planned and I need to check on things." "Of course," Grace said, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. "Thank you again for everything." Gideon looked like he wanted to say something else, but he just nodded. "Take care of yourself, Grace." He turned to leave, and Grace felt panic rise in her chest. She could not let him go like this. She could not let him disappear from her life without at least trying. "Gideon, wait," she said. He turned back, and Grace took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something. These past few days with you, they have meant more to me than I can say. You saved my life, yes, but it is more than that. You made me feel safe and valued and seen. And I know this is probably not proper, and I know I should not say this, but I do not want to let you go without telling you that I have feelings for you." Gideon stared at her, his gray eyes wide. Grace barreled on before she could lose her nerve. "I know we barely know each other, and I know you probably do not feel the same way, but I could not let you leave without being honest. So there it is. I care about you, Gideon Irving, more than I probably should." The silence that followed was the longest of Grace's life. Gideon just looked at her, and Grace felt her face burning with embarrassment. She had made a fool of herself. He was going to let her down gently and leave, and she would never see him again. But then Gideon smiled, that same smile that had transformed his face in the shelter, and he took a step toward her. "Grace," he said, his voice rough. "I have been trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing. These past few days with you, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. About your strength, your determination, your kindness. I have not been able to imagine going back to my ranch and not having you there." Grace felt her heart soar. "Really, really," Gideon said. He took another step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I have not known you long, but I know enough. I know that I do not want to say goodbye to you. I know that I want to see where this could go." "So do I," Grace whispered. Gideon reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. "Then do not make me say goodbye. Come back to the ranch with me, see if you like it, see if you like this life. And if you do, then maybe we could build something together." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes, but these were happy tears. "But Thomas is going to be fine, and you know it," Gideon said. "And besides, my ranch is not that far. You could visit him whenever you wanted. Grace thought about Denver, about the life she had built there, about the children she taught and the friends she had made. It was a good life, a safe life, but it was not the life she wanted anymore. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will come with you." Gideon's smile grew wider and he squeezed her hand. "You will not regret it, I promise." Grace spoke with Thomas, who was thrilled at the news and gave his blessing immediately. "I like him," he said, "and I like the idea of you being happy. Go, Gracie. Live your life." Mrs. Patterson was equally supportive, promising to continue caring for Thomas until he was back on his feet. "Love is too precious to let slip away," she said wisely. 2 days later, after Grace had nursed Thomas a bit more and assured herself that he truly was on the mend, she climbed onto Copper behind Gideon, her arms around his waist, and they rode out of Moab together. The journey to Gideon's ranch took 3 days. 3 days of riding through snowy landscapes, of making camp under the stars, of talking and laughing and learning about each other. Grace told Gideon about her childhood, about her dreams and fears. Gideon told Grace about the ranch, about his plans for the future, about the life he wanted to build. By the time they crested the final hill and Grace saw the ranch spread out below them, she felt like she had known Gideon for years instead of days. The ranch was beautiful. A simple wooden house sat in a small valley, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Fences marked off pastures where horses and cattle grazed, and mountains rose up in the distance, majestic and eternal. "It is perfect," Grace breathed. "It is home," Gideon said. "And I hope it will be yours too." They rode down to the house, and before they even dismounted, a large dog came bounding out, barking excitedly. He was indeed the ugliest dog Grace had ever seen, some mix of breeds that resulted in floppy ears, a pushed-in face, and a tail that seemed too long for his body. "That is Buck," Gideon said, laughing as the dog jumped up on him. "Buck, sit. Good boy, this is Grace. You be nice to her." Buck immediately transferred his attention to Grace, sniffing her thoroughly before deciding she was acceptable and licking her hand. Grace laughed and scratched behind his ears. "Hello, Buck. I think we are going to be friends." Gideon showed Grace around the ranch, introducing her to the 2 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. They were both older men, weathered by years of hard work, and they tipped their hats respectfully to Grace. "This is Grace Garrison," Gideon said. "She is going to be staying with us for a while." If they had any thoughts about the propriety of an unmarried woman staying on a ranch with a single man, they kept it to themselves. One of them, a man named Pete, just nodded and said, "Welcome, miss. It will be nice to have someone with some sense around here." The house was simple but comfortable. There were 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace, and a kitchen that was clearly rarely used for anything more complicated than coffee and fried meat. "You can have the spare room," Gideon said. "I will give you all the time you need. No pressure, no expectations. We will figure this out together." Grace appreciated that more than she could say. She was taking a huge leap coming here, and Gideon's respect for her boundaries made her trust him even more. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Grace had never lived on a ranch before, and there was so much to learn. But Gideon was a patient teacher, and Grace was a quick student. She learned to help with the horses, to mend fences, to prepare meals that were more substantial than her Denver boarding house fare had been. She also wrote to her supervisor at the school in Denver, explaining the situation and resigning her position. It hurt to let go of that part of her life, but she knew it was the right choice. In the evenings, she and Gideon would sit by the fire and talk. Sometimes they played cards or read from the few books Gideon owned. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. And slowly, as the days passed, their relationship deepened. The attraction that had sparked in the shelter grew into something warmer, something solid and real. Gideon would touch her hand as he passed her the coffee pot. Grace would lean into his shoulder as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Small touches, small moments, building into something bigger. One evening in late January, about a month after Grace had arrived at the ranch, Gideon took her hand and led her outside. The sky was clear, and the stars were brilliant against the darkness. "Grace," he said, turning to face her, "this past month has been the happiest of my life. Having you here, talking to you, working beside you, it has made me realize what I have been missing all these years." Grace felt her heart start to race. "Gideon, let me finish," he said gently. "I know we have not known each other long. I know that by all rights we should take more time, do this properly. But I also know my own heart, and I know that I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your laugh. I love the way you are not afraid to get your hands dirty, and I love the way you challenge me to be better. I love you, Grace Garrison, and I want you to be my wife." He pulled out a simple gold band from his pocket. "This was my mother's," he said. "My father gave it to her when they got married, and she wore it every day until she died. I know it is not fancy, but—" "It is perfect," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "And yes, Gideon, yes, I will marry you. I love you too." Gideon slipped the ring onto her finger and then he kissed her. It was soft and gentle at first, then deeper, full of promise and passion. Grace wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her feelings into it. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I am the luckiest man alive," he said. "I am pretty lucky myself," Grace said, laughing through her tears. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Moab. Thomas, fully recovered, stood as witness, beaming with pride. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears. The circuit preacher declared them husband and wife, and when Gideon kissed his bride, Grace felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a joining not just of bodies but of souls. Gideon was gentle and patient, making sure Grace felt safe and loved. And afterwards, lying in his arms, Grace knew without a doubt that she had made the right choice. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were hard days when the work seemed endless, when the weather turned bad, when money was tight. But Grace and Gideon faced it all together, partners in the truest sense of the word. Grace started teaching again, holding classes for the ranch hands' children and the children from neighboring ranches. She set up a small schoolroom in one of the outbuildings, and soon she had a dozen students of various ages. Gideon built her proper desks and helped her order books from Denver. "I love watching you teach," he told her one day, leaning in the doorway of the schoolroom. "You are so good with them, patient and kind, but you do not let them get away with anything." Grace smiled at him, her heart full. "I love teaching, and I am so grateful that I can still do it here." The seasons turned. Spring brought new foals and calves. Summer brought hard work and long days. Fall brought the harvest and preparations for winter. Winter brought snow and cold, but also cozy evenings by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms. A year after their marriage, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Gideon one evening after supper, too excited to wait. Gideon's face lit up like the sun, and he picked her up and spun her around. "We are going to have a baby, we are," Grace said, laughing. "I hope you are ready for it." "I have been ready my whole life," Gideon said. Their son was born in early autumn, a healthy baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him William, after Gideon's father. Holding her son for the first time, Grace thought back to that day in the blizzard, when she had been certain she was going to die. She thought about how Gideon had appeared out of the snow like a miracle, how he had said those 3 words, "I've got you," and he had. He had kept that promise every day since. Through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, he had her, and she had him. William grew into a sturdy boy, curious and adventurous. When he was 2, Grace became pregnant again, this time with twins. 2 daughters, Anna and Emma, who had their mother's smile and their father's quiet strength. The ranch prospered. Gideon's cattle herd grew, and his horses became known throughout the territory for their quality. Grace's school expanded, and she became known as one of the best teachers in the area. Thomas visited often, bringing his own wife eventually, a kind woman named Rebecca whom he had met in Moab. They settled in the town, and Thomas opened a small general store. The 2 families were close, and Grace's children adored their uncle. Years passed, and Grace and Gideon grew older together. Their children grew up strong and capable. William showed an aptitude for working with horses and took over more of the ranch work. Anna was bright and studious, and Grace knew she would be a teacher someday. Emma was artistic, always drawing and painting the beautiful landscapes around them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gideon took Grace back to the old mining shelter where they had waited out the blizzard. It was summer now, and the shelter looked even more ramshackle than she remembered. But standing there, she could almost feel the ghost of that scared young woman she had been, could almost hear the howl of the wind. "You ever regret it?" Gideon asked, taking her hand. "Giving up your life in Denver, coming out here to the middle of nowhere with me?" Grace looked at her husband, at the lines on his face that had been carved by years of laughter and work and life, at the gray in his hair that matched the gray of his eyes. "Not for a single second," she said. "You saved my life that day, Gideon, but it is more than that. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and partnership and a family. You gave me a home. How could I ever regret that?" Gideon pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was just as sweet as their first kiss had been all those years ago. "I love you, Grace Irving," he said. "I love you too," she replied. They stood there in the shadow of the old shelter, remembering the people they had been, grateful for the people they had become. More years passed. Grace and Gideon became grandparents when William married and had children of his own. Anna did indeed become a teacher, opening her own school in a neighboring town. Emma married an artist and moved to Santa Fe, where her paintings began to gain recognition. Grace's hair turned gray, and her hands became weathered from years of work. Gideon's back ached on cold mornings, and he moved a little slower than he once had. But their love never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Looking around the table at all the faces she loved, Grace felt overwhelmed with gratitude. All of this, all these people, all this love, had come from a single moment of courage, from Gideon riding out into a blizzard and refusing to give up, from Grace accepting his help and taking a chance on something unknown. One evening in their later years, Grace and Gideon sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of the day. Buck had long since passed, and his successor, Buck Jr., slept at their feet. "You remember what you said to me that day in the blizzard?" Grace asked. "When you found me," Gideon smiled. "I've got you." "You did," Grace said softly, "and you never let go." "Never," Gideon agreed. He reached over and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "And I never will." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, one of their grandchildren was laughing. The horses nickered softly in the barn. The wind whispered through the grass. Grace leaned her head on Gideon's shoulder and closed her eyes, content. This life they had built together, this family they had created, this love they had nurtured through 3 decades. It was everything she had never known she wanted. And it had all started with a blizzard, a cowboy, and 3 simple words. Years later, when they were both old and gray, Gideon fell ill. It was his heart, the doctor said. There was nothing to be done. Grace sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, telling him stories about their life together. "I am not afraid," Gideon told her one night, his voice weak but steady. "I have had a good life, Grace, the best life, because of you." "Because of us," Grace corrected, tears streaming down her face. "We did it together." "Promise me something," Gideon said. "Anything. Promise me you will keep living, keep teaching, keep loving. Do not give up just because I am gone." "I promise," Grace said, though the thought of life without him was unbearable. Gideon died peacefully in his sleep a week later, Grace's hand in his. She grieved deeply, as did their children and grandchildren. They buried him on the ranch, on a hill overlooking the valley, with a simple marker bearing his name and the dates of his birth and death. Grace kept her promise. She continued teaching, though she was well into her 70s. She spent time with her children and grandchildren. She tended Gideon's grave and talked to him about her day. She lived. But she never forgot, not for a single moment, the man who had saved her life and then made it worth living. When Grace finally passed away at the age of 82, surrounded by her family, her last words were, "I'm coming, Gideon. I've got you now." They buried her next to her husband, and the whole town turned out for the funeral. People spoke of her kindness, her dedication to teaching, her unwavering love for her family. Her children spoke of her strength and her warmth. Her grandchildren spoke of her wisdom and her laugh. But the most telling tribute came from William, who stood at her grave with tears streaming down his weathered face and said, "My mother taught me that love is not something you fall into. It is something you choose, every single day." She and my father chose each other through every hardship and every joy. That is the legacy she left us. That is what she taught us. To love fiercely, to love faithfully, to love forever. Years after both Grace and Gideon were gone, the ranch remained in the family. Their great-grandchildren worked the land and raised horses, continuing the legacy. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original structure remained, a testament to the foundation Grace and Gideon had built. And sometimes, on winter nights when the snow was falling and the wind was howling, the family would sit around the fire and tell the story of how it all began. The story of a young woman stranded in a blizzard, of a cowboy who refused to give up, of 3 words that changed everything. "I've got you," they would say, remembering. And in the telling, Grace and Gideon lived on, their love as enduring as the mountains, as constant as the stars, as powerful as the storm that had brought them together. It was a love that had started with a moment of desperation and had grown into a lifetime of devotion. A love that had created a family, built a legacy, and proved that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. A love that had shown them both what they were capable of when they opened their hearts to possibility. And in the end, it was a love that had been worth every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. Because what Grace and Gideon had found in each other was something rare and precious. A true partnership, a deep friendship, a passionate romance, all wrapped into one. They had found home in each other. And that was the greatest gift of all,